Hello, it's Kasyfi. So, the book I'm going to be reviewing is The Five People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. So, the plot of the book talks about Eddie, who's a war veteran, found himself in the afterlife after a tragic accident. He then meets the five people that have impacted his life in a way. Some he knew, but some were complete strangers to him, but still, they changed his path forever. He then gets his life explained by these people, and he finally understands his seemingly mundane and sad life. So, the first person Eddie met in heaven is the Blue Man. So, when Eddie was a child, he and Joe were playing ball outside. The ball bounced into the street and Eddie ran after it. The Blue Man, who was practicing his driving, almost hit Eddie but veered away just in time. Since the Blue Man was already nervous to be driving, his close encounter with Eddie shook him up even more. He began swerving on the road and having a sort of anxiety attack. He pulled over to regain his composure and ended up hitting a truck, which brought him to his death. So then Eddie learns his first lesson, that there are no random acts in life, that all actions are intertwined in some way to affect the life of someone else. If Eddie had never chased his ball into the street, the Blue Man may have never died. However, since the Blue Man steered the car clear of hitting Eddie, one of the benefits of the Blue Man's death was that Eddie was able to live. His second person was the captain. The captain is the second person Eddie meets in heaven and is also his former captain in World War II. While they were at war, the captain made a promise to Eddie and his other soldiers that he was not leaving anyone behind. The captain suffered through the prisoner of war camp and even the escape with his men. During the escape, they found themselves in a suspicious piece of land. The captain decided to survey the land, and unbeknownst to him, he had stepped on a landmine and was killed. So then Eddie learns his second lesson. The captain even sacrificed his life so that the other soldiers were able to live. Had he not been willing to survey the land himself, all four men would have driven over the landmine and been killed. Eddie also realizes that when one loses something, they often gain something. One quote I like from this particular lesson was that sometimes when you sacrifice something precious, you are not really losing it, you're just passing it on to someone else. His third person. So the third person Eddie meets in heaven is Ruby. So when Eddie meets Ruby in heaven, she is elderly. However, when Ruby was younger, she worked as a waitress at a diner in Eddie's town. Ruby met her husband, Emil, in the diner when he came in as a customer. When he proposed marriage to Ruby, they were sitting in the sand watching the ocean. Emil said that he wanted to build Ruby a seaside resort to capture the happiness of that moment and so they could stay eternally young. Emil later built the park and named it Ruby Pier, after Ruby. Eddie, as we know, dedicated his life to work in the Ruby Pier. So then Eddie learns his third lesson. Ruby explained to him why his father always acted so strictly towards him and his mother, and he hated his father for that. He had been holding in his anger and he resented his father. Ruby told him, "Holding anger is a poison. It eats from the inside. We think hating is a weapon that attacks the person who harmed us, but hatred is a curved blade, and the harm we do to ourselves." His fourth person, Margaret. Margaret was the love of Eddie's life. When he was young, he met her at the pier, and she then continued to be the happiness in Eddie's life. Margaret was always there for Eddie and never stopped providing him with unconditional love. Before Eddie left for war, Margaret said she would wait for him to come back. When he returned injured and depressed, Margaret still stayed with Eddie and married him. During several flashbacks to Eddie's earlier birthdays, we see that Margaret always had a celebration for him. It seems that Eddie loved everything Margaret would do for him, but he never told her how much he appreciated her. We see how sad Eddie is after Margaret's death, especially on his birthday. He then learns his fourth lesson. In heaven, Margaret teaches Eddie about the power and endurance of love. Margaret tells Eddie that even after she died, her love for him did not disappear. She had always loved him and would continue to forever. Eddie learned from Margaret that although life ends, love does not. At the end of the story, he is reunited with her. Lastly, Margaret told him, "Lost love is still love. It takes a different form, that is all. But when the senses weaken, another heightens, memory. Memory becomes your partner. You nurture it, you hold it, you dance with it." His fifth person he met in heaven is Tala. When Eddie set the prisoner of war camp on fire during the war, he was sure he saw an innocent child crawling around in the fire. For the rest of his life, he had nightmares, and that thought haunted him. It seemed as though he knew in his heart that he had killed a child, but his question was never answered. When Eddie meets Tala, she tells him that he burnt her. Eddie now realizes that there was a child in that fire, and it was Tala. He then learns his fifth lesson. Most of Eddie's doubts and questions that had put a strain on his life were answered by Tala. It was she who he killed in the fire during the war. He did save the little girl from the falling amusement at the pier right before he died, and also that he was meant to work at Ruby Pier. She teaches Eddie that his life did have a purpose, which was to keep the children safe at the pier. So now, to rate this book, I would give this book a solid 4 out of 5. So, this type of book was never really my favorite types, as I have always found myself stuck on reading endless romance novels. But there is truth in you will never know it until you try it. I have unexpectedly enjoyed this book to the max. This book has opened my eyes to a lot more things and taught me new things that wasn't even in the reservoir of my knowledge yet at the time when I read this book. I also like how each and every emotion with the different people Eddie met in heaven could be clearly felt as you turn the pages. The author uses a very good very good words, and just overall, the message was conveyed to the reader successfully. Overall, I have to say this book is a masterpiece, and you have to try this book because, again, you'll never know it until you try it. So, lastly, this is the picture of the book. As you can see, it says "The Five People You Meet in Heaven" by Mitch Albom, and I would also recommend the sequel to this book, which is called Tuesdays with Maury. Basically, it's just a continuation of this book. So, I think that is all for now, and it would be nice, very nice, for you to just give this video a like. Okay, that is all.